Galactic Council sent 5,000 ships. Earth sent them home in pieces. Part 1. The signal came at 400 hours and lit up every screen on the planet at once. No preamble, no warning. 5,000 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system, and the gravitational shockwave knocked out 17 satellites before anyone on Earth could blink. Admiral Colin Drake was halfway through his second coffee when Lieutenant Nora Fenn grabbed his arm hard enough to leave a mark. "You need to see this right now, sir." The holographic display above the command table showed a field of red contacts so thick they looked like a dust cloud. 5,012 vessels, ranging from destroyer class to something so enormous the sensors kept recalibrating, unable to settle on a measurement. The largest ship in the Council fleet was longer than some of Earth's mountain ranges were wide. Drake set his coffee down slowly. "Signal count confirmed?" he asked. 5,012, Nora said. 12 are broadcasting on diplomatic frequencies. They're moving ahead of the main group. Of course they are. The diplomatic ships held position just inside lunar orbit. A message arrived seconds later, translated in real time by the relay network Earth had spent 40 years building for exactly this kind of moment. The voice that came through was smooth, practiced, and utterly certain of itself. "Attention, inhabitants of the third planet of this star system. You have been evaluated by the Galactic Council of Sovereign Worlds and found to be an unacceptable risk to galactic stability. Your species has demonstrated repeated disregard for Council directives, unauthorized territorial expansion, development of prohibited weapons technology, and failure to submit to mandatory registration. You have one planetary rotation to comply with the following terms: full military surrender, disarmament of all orbital platforms, transfer of all advanced research data to Council custody. Failure to comply will result in the application of corrective force." Corrective force. Drake had heard that phrase before, in classified briefings and late-night conversations among officers who had spent entire careers quietly preparing for this day. It was the Council's polished way of saying they would erase what they could not control. He turned to Nora. "Get me General Mace, full joint command assembled in the underground center, and get me Dr. Wren from the Deep Research Division." "Already paging them," Nora said. "Good." He looked at the red cloud on the display one more time. "Tell me, Lieutenant, how long has Earth been preparing for exactly this?" Nora almost smiled. "Officially, 40 years, unofficially longer than that." Drake picked up his coffee again. "Then let's show them what 40 years looks like." The underground operations center beneath the Colorado Range was already humming when Drake arrived. General Aaron Mace stood at the main tactical table, arms folded, studying the feed with the kind of stillness that only came from spending a lifetime preparing for something enormous. Dr. Claire Wren sat at the far end, tablet in hand, not looking up when Drake entered. She had not slept in 30 hours. She was also the person who had overseen Earth's most classified project from the very beginning. "Fleet hasn't moved from holding position," Mace said. "They're waiting for our response. Based on Council behavioral patterns, they expect the surrender process to start within the next few hours." "That's what they always expect," Wren said, finally looking up. "We intercepted Council records 6 years ago. They've run this operation 47 times. 47 species approached with an ultimatum. 47 surrenders, all within the first 12 hours. "None of them knew what was coming," Drake said. "None of them had a reason to believe they could survive it," Wren corrected. "We do." She tapped her tablet and a new overlay appeared on the main display. It showed the inner solar system, and layered over Earth, the Moon, Mars, and the full asteroid belt was a network so dense and interconnected it looked like something alive. Orbital platforms, relay emitters, phased compression arrays embedded in asteroid rock, long-range rail installations disguised as mining operations. Thousands of nodes, all dark, all waiting. "Project Shield Wall," May said quietly. fully operational. The Council has no record of its existence. Wren nodded. We made absolutely certain of that. 22 hours left in their compliance window, Nora said from behind Drake. Drake did not need 22 hours. He walked to the main console, opened the diplomatic frequency, and spoke without hesitation. This is Admiral Colin Drake, United Earth Defense Command. We have received your terms. We reject them entirely. Earth does not surrender. Earth does not disarm. Before your fleet moves 1 more kilometer toward this planet, I strongly advise you to take a very careful look at what is standing between you and us. He closed the channel. 11 seconds of silence. Then the Council fleet began to move. Shield wall came online. Part 2. Fleet Commander Zareth had personally overseen the correction of 9 worlds. He had never seen what happened next. The first wave of Council destroyers, 400 vessels arranged in a standard approach wedge, crossed the outer boundary marker of Earth's designated orbital space, and then the tactical display went quiet. Not jammed, not scrambled, just quiet. 40 red contacts vanished from the feed in the span of a single breath. Then 40 more. Zareth straightened in his command seat. Report. His sensor officer was already working, fingers moving fast across the console. No incoming fire detected. No energy signatures consistent with any known weapon system. The contacts are simply gone, Commander. Things do not simply disappear, Zareth said. They do now, his officer replied. On Earth, Pete Holt was laughing. He was the lead engineer on the shield wall emitter grid, and he had spent 11 years building something the Council would not see coming, because it operated on a principle their own weapons research had dismissed as impractical 3 centuries ago. Gravitational compression nodes, deployed in overlapping fields, applied steadily increasing pressure to the molecular cohesion of anything that entered their range. Not a beam, not an explosion. A silent, invisible tightening of space around a target until the target simply stopped holding together. It was, Pete had once told his team during a very long night of testing, the most efficient method of conflict resolution ever engineered by human hands. Grid Sector 1 holding firm, he said into his headset. No bleed, no drift. Nodes are auto-tracking. We are green across the full inner boundary. In the ops center, Drake watched another 30 Council ships enter the grid's outer range and vanish from sensors. They're going to identify the rough boundary soon enough, Wren said beside him. Good, Drake replied. Let them. The plan was not simply to destroy ships. It was to teach the Council something. The lesson was this. Earth did not fight the way they expected. Earth did not form up a fleet and exchange fire at measured range. Earth had spent 40 years constructing a planet-scale trap, and the Council had walked straight into it because no species in the recorded history of the galaxy had possessed the patience, the stubbornness, or the sheer calculated determination to build something like shield wall in complete silence. Zareth pulled his remaining approach wings back to a safe distance and stared at the tactical picture. 211 ships gone. No wreckage trail. No distress signals. No explanation that made any sense within the framework of everything the Council understood about weapons. He opened a channel to his chief analyst, Veth, Analysis. Veth was the sharpest tactical mind on the command ship, methodical in a way that sometimes frustrated faster thinkers around him. He ran the geometry of the losses, plotted each disappearance, and looked at the resulting shape for a long moment. The losses follow a spatial boundary consistent with a field effect system of some kind, Veth said. Passive in nature. It does not project outward. Objects enter it and cease to exist. The effect is consistent across every point of contact we have data on. How large is the field? Zareth asked. Veth paused. That is the significant detail, Commander. Tell me. It appears to encompass the entire inner system. Zareth sat back in his seat and said nothing. On Earth, Pete Holt was no longer laughing. He was watching the Council fleet reorganize at distance, and he knew exactly what that meant. They were done probing. They were shifting to a different strategy. "They're pulling back into a wide formation," Nora reported from the comms station. "Siege envelope. They're going to try to cut access to anything outside the system and wait." Drake shook his head. "They assume we need resupply from outside. They don't know about the belt operations." "Should we tell them?" Mace asked, voice as dry as old stone. "Not yet," Drake turned to Wren. "Is the second layer ready?" Wren touched her earpiece. "Captain Bray's team is standing by on the lunar surface." Captain Owen Bray was not in the ops center. He was in a pressurized hangar on the moon's dark side, standing in front of 40 pilots and 200 special operations personnel, all fully suited and waiting. Behind them sat a fleet of ships that looked nothing like warships because they had been designed specifically not to look like warships. They looked like debris. Loose panels, irregular shapes, spinning gently on their long axes. The kind of scatter you expected to find drifting in the gravitational eddies near a large rocky body. For 2 years, Owen's team had rehearsed this, launching from the lunar surface on low-energy trajectories that mimicked floating rock, drifting, tumbling, moving at exactly the pace debris moved, getting close. Then not being debris anymore. Their command ships are holding at approximately 12,000 kilometers outside the grid, Nora said. Fleet Commander's formation is anchored around the main carrier group. Drake nodded once. "Tell Owen it's time." 40 debris clouds floated out from the moon's shadow, spinning slowly, perfectly matching the scatter pattern of natural impact ejecta. 40 ships crewed by some of the most capable people Earth had ever produced, drifting in long, lazy arcs directly toward the Council fleet's command tier. Zareth did not look at the debris. He was fully occupied arguing with his logistics staff about supply projections for a siege that might last months. Veth was looking at the debris. Veth was the only one who noticed that the drift pattern was moving with a consistency that did not match natural behavior. Rock did not tumble with that kind of steady regularity. Rock did not hold relative spacing. Veth opened his mouth. Owen Bray's ship stopped being debris. Part 3. 40 ships went from dead drift to full burn in under 2 seconds, and the Council command tier had no time at all to respond. Owen Bray's vessel drove straight at the broadside of a Council battle carrier, not to strike it, but to use the carrier's own hull as cover. A ship that large could not bring its primary weapons to bear on a contact pressed that close without tearing into itself. "Breach team go," Owen said. 6 boarding charges fired simultaneously, each punching a clean entry through the outer hull plating of the carrier. Owen's teams were through the breaches in under 30 seconds, moving into corridors lit by the red pulse of emergency alerts in a language no one on the team had ever spoken aloud. The shape of chaos was the same in any species. Owen did not need the language. He needed the communications core. His team moved through the ship with the precision of people who had spent 2 years studying every Council vessel class on record. They had the internal layout. They had walked mock-up corridors until the distances and turns were automatic. "Junction 4, said Point Man, will car through the team channel. Left, then 40 meters. "On me," Owen replied. They reached the communications core 3 minutes after breaching. Owen's technical lead pulled a data drive from her kit and inserted it into the Council system before the first security lock could engage. The drive began pulling everything: command codes, fleet frequencies, formation orders, the Council's live tactical picture. 39 other ships were doing the same thing to 39 other vessels simultaneously. In the ops center on Earth, the stolen data began flowing in. Commander Lee Voss stood over the analysis station watching it resolve into something readable. "We have their full command frequencies," she said. "Formation protocols, contingency codes, emergency authorization keys." She looked up. "We can broadcast on their internal command band and they will not know the source." Hold that for now, Drake said. There's something else first. When Owen's team had entered the carrier's communications core, they had found someone waiting. A tall, gray-skinned officer stood in the center of the room with his hands held out at his sides, not reaching for anything, not moving. He spoke in the council language, and the translation unit on Owen's wrist caught up after a moment. "I have been waiting," the translation read, "for humans to do exactly this." Owen had secured him immediately and contacted Drake. The officer's name was Veth. He was Zareth's chief tactical analyst, and he had spent 3 years carrying something that his own commanders would have ended his career for possessing. A complete accounting of every species the Council had subjected to corrective force. The ones who had surrendered and were still standing, their cultures dismantled and their resources redirected. The ones who had surrendered and were no longer standing at all. It was not a short list. Wren looked at the data appearing on her display, and the room went quiet without anyone deciding to make it quiet. "How many total?" Drake asked. 63 civilizations across 400 years, Wren said. 11 eliminated entirely. The remaining 52 exist as client states. Their technology is suppressed. Their populations are managed. Their expansion is controlled. She stopped. The Council does not want partners, it wants property. Veth spoke again. The translation unit rendered it carefully. There are species within the Council's own membership who did not choose this arrangement freely. They were folded in the same manner as the others. They comply because the alternative was demonstrated to them a very long time ago. If Earth survives this engagement, if Earth proves that this can be survived, some of them may remember a courage they buried. Drake looked at Veth directly. "Why are you doing this?" The translation unit processed the response. "Because I have been the person running the numbers for 9 of those corrections," it read. "And I am finished running the numbers." Sam Crew's fighter wing had been holding at the lunar staging point for 6 hours when the order came through. Sam was 29, lean, and quiet in the way that made other pilots slightly nervous around him. He got calm when things went badly wrong. He found solutions in spaces the tactical manual had not thought to cover. "Wing, this is Crew," he said into the channel. "We have a tasking. The Council Fleet Support Tier is holding about 18,000 kilometers behind the carrier group, fuel ships, repair tenders, haulers. They believe they are sitting safely outside the grid boundary." He paused a beat. "They are not outside the grid boundary." The pilots in his wing started laughing before he finished the sentence. "Pete's team extended the outer emitter line 2 weeks ago," Sam continued. "There is an additional 3,000 kilometers of coverage the Council has not accounted for. We are going to fly a wide approach and herd the support tier directly into it." They launched 4 minutes later. 15 Council support ships crossed the extended boundary and disappeared. The rest reversed at maximum acceleration. Sam watched them run and felt the clean satisfaction of a plan that worked cleanly on its first execution. In the ops center, Mace looked at the emerging strategic picture. They have no resupply. Their forward elements have roughly 60 hours of operational capacity remaining. We control the inner system completely. "Zareth understands that now," Wren said. "Yes," Drake agreed, "which means he is going to stop being careful." He was right. Part 4. Zareth launched everything he had left. Not in formation waves, not in coordinated sequences, all of it from every direction, simultaneously. A full-force push from multiple vectors designed to overwhelm any field effect system by sheer volume. If enough ships hit the boundary at the same time from enough approach angles, something had to get through. The mathematics of saturation made it inevitable. It was the right concept. In any conventional engagement, it would have worked. Earth had identified the approach 3 years earlier and built the counter into the grid's base design. Pete Holt had engineered a node system that managed density spikes by redistributing compression load across neighboring emitters in real time. The same fundamental logic that a power grid used to reroute current around a fault point. The denser the incoming contact cluster at any single node, the more load transferred automatically to surrounding nodes. The more vectors Zareth used, the more evenly the grid distributed the work. The math had taken 18 months to finalize. It held. Zareth's remaining fleet struck the boundary in a pulse that registered on seismic sensors across the entire planet, and then 2,407 ships ceased to exist in the space of roughly 90 seconds. The 1,200 vessels held in reserve, which had not reached the boundary in time, stopped moving entirely. The Council fleet was no longer a force. It was a collection of ships sitting in deep space with no supplies, no orders that made sense, and no understanding of what they were facing. Drake came aboard the commandeered carrier and met Zareth face to face. Zareth was taller than a human, broad across the shoulders, with layered scales along his neck and jaw that shifted color with his emotional state. Right now they were a flat, dull gray. Veth had quietly informed Drake's team that flat gray in Zareth's species indicated the particular internal state a commander experienced when a campaign had moved so far outside every known parameter that no training applied anymore. Drake sat across from him at the carrier's command briefing table. Lee Voss stood to Drake's left. Owen Bray stood to his right. Neither of them said a word. Zareth spoke first. "You prepared for this," he said. "For 40 years," Drake replied. The scales shifted slightly, something between disbelief and a reluctant acknowledgement. "No species in the Council's operational history has ever prepared for a corrective action," Zareth said. "The behavioral modeling for your developmental stage indicates internal division too significant for coordinated response at this scale. Your governments oppose each other. Your resources are contested. Your population fights itself continuously." "All of that is true," Drake said. "But when something from outside tries to take what belongs to us, we tend to reach an agreement with each other fairly quickly." Zareth looked at the surface of the table. "My fleet has no operational capacity for resupply. I cannot breach your grid with available assets. I cannot withdraw without authorization from the Council's central authority, and that authorization will not come because the Council does not acknowledge the failure of corrective actions. The record does not permit it." "Then the Council has a serious problem," Drake said. "The Council will eventually send a larger force," Zareth said. "If this fleet is lost entirely, they will not accept the outcome. They will classify it, restructure the record, and come again with more ships." "Then we need to make sure," Drake replied, "that when we are finished here, the Council no longer has the ability to make that decision quietly." He turned to Lee. "Open the full broadcast." Using Veth's stolen authorization codes, Lee opened a channel that reached every remaining ship in the Council fleet on their own internal command band. The same codes also connected through a relay sequence Veth had provided to the Council's public information network, the same network that every member species and client state used for official communications. The whole Council network was now listening. Drake looked at the pickup. "This transmission is being sent across the full Council network. What follows is a documented record of actions carried out under Council authority over the last 400 years. This is not a threat or a declaration of war. This is a record." Ren's team began broadcasting Veth's files. 63 civilizations, the ones still standing, stripped and managed, the 11 that were not standing at all. In the communication chambers of 3 Council member species that had always suspected, always stayed quiet, always concluded it was not their place to speak, signal channels began activating. Not all of them, not even most of them. But enough. Owen Bray's boarding teams had by this point secured 7 Council vessels without significant resistance. Several crews had simply stopped opposing them once the broadcast started. A few had opened interior access points from the inside. In the lunar hangar, Sam Cruz sat with his wing pilots around a portable heater someone had dragged in from the maintenance bay, listening to the broadcast come through on the general channel. 63, Sam said, to no one in particular. No one said anything for a while after that. Part 5. The 1,200 remaining council ships did not advance. They also did not leave. For 18 hours following the broadcast, they held formation at the grid boundary, and the communications traffic between them ran at a constant high volume. Zareth, still aboard the commandeered carrier with Drake's personnel on every deck, received a message from the Council's central authority. The encoding was layered and took time to work through, but Veth processed it methodically and handed the result to Drake. The Council wanted to open a dialogue. Not with Earth's military. With Earth's civilian government. Interesting, Drake said. They believe they can negotiate around the military, Lee said. They want someone with less complete information and more political flexibility. Then they should talk to someone with every piece of information and no flexibility at all, Drake replied. Senator Greg Hollies had been awake for 31 hours, managing the political dimension of the situation from the secure facility in Geneva. He was not a military man. He was a career politician who had spent 20 years building workable agreements in rooms where agreement seemed impossible. He had a particular talent for identifying what the opposing party actually needed, as distinct from what they said they needed. When Drake gave him the full picture, Holly sat back and thought quietly for a moment. They are not requesting dialogue because they believe they hold any advantage, Holly said. They are requesting it because their own member species are now asking questions they cannot answer in public. The broadcast shifted the internal architecture of their authority. They need this to end quietly before more members start moving. Veth's assessment matches that exactly, Drake said. 3 of the smaller council members have already gone silent on official channels. Private traffic is elevated. The council's coordination structure depends on unified movement. It is beginning to separate. Hollies looked at the ceiling briefly. Then we negotiate, but not behind closed doors. We use the same channel we used for the broadcast, full network access. Drake smiled. I was hoping you would say that. The negotiation session opened on a frequency the entire council network could access in real time. The council sent 2 senior representatives, the same category of smooth, practiced voices that had delivered the original ultimatum to Earth. They arrived at the carrier and sat across from Hollies, who had been transferred up from Geneva. Drake stood behind Hollies and said nothing. Wren stood beside Drake and said nothing. Veth sat at the far end of the table. The council representatives opened with a structured proposal. Earth would stand down its defensive grid. In exchange, the council would withdraw its remaining fleet, reassess Earth's classification status, and initiate formal membership discussions under the standard framework. The wording was careful, precise, and designed to make a fundamental capitulation sound like a reasonable compromise. Hollies listened to the entire proposal without interrupting. When they finished, he folded his hands on the table. No, he said. The representatives blinked. Senator, perhaps if we examine the specific parameters. You sent 5,000 ships to this planet, Hollies said, his voice steady and unhurried. You demanded our full surrender and the transfer of our civilization's research into your custody. You described the destruction of everything we have built as corrective force. You have done this exact thing to 63 other civilizations. 11 of them no longer exist. He paused for 2 seconds. What you have proposed is that we place our trust in the organization responsible for all of that. That is not a serious offer. One of the representatives leaned forward. Senator, continued conflict serves neither party's long-term. The conflict is already over, Holly said. What remains is the terms. He placed a document on the table, not a display. A physical document printed on paper because Hollies had decided some things needed to be made tangible. A binding non-aggression certification. verified by independent parties from species outside the Council structure. Full recognition of Earth's sovereignty and unrestricted expansion rights. The immediate release of all client-state species from mandatory dependency arrangements. An independent tribunal to review every corrective action in Council history, with findings made publicly available across the full network. He met the representative's eyes without looking away. Those are the terms. They are not an opening position. They are the terms. The broadcast was live. Every species on the Council network was watching. The Council cannot agree to a tribunal of that scope, one representative said carefully. The historical complexity involved. The historical complexity, Veth said from the end of the table, voice level and utterly without performance, is precisely the point. You have always known what was in those files. Every senior Council official who has ever held authority has known. The question was never whether the record existed. The question was whether anyone would ever have sufficient standing to demand that the record be opened. He looked at both representatives without blinking. Someone does now, he said. Outside the carrier, visible on the tactical feed, 4 vessels belonging to one of the Council's smaller member species broke formation and repositioned away from the main group. A transmission came from their lead ship, in their own language, directed at the Council representatives on an open frequency. Ren read the translation in a quiet, even voice. They are withdrawing from the Council fleet formation. They state they will not participate in any further action against Earth. They are requesting inclusion in the tribunal provision as a cooperating party. One of the representatives stared at the feed without speaking. Then a second group of ships moved. Different species, same direction. Then a third. The Council's assembled fleet was no longer a unified instrument. It was becoming a collection of individual decisions, each one visible to everyone on the network, each one making the next one easier. The representatives looked at Hollies. Hollies did not look away. The terms, he said again, quietly, the same 2 words as before. The silence that followed was long enough that everyone at the table could hear the carrier's ambient systems running in the background. Then the lead representative reached across the table and signed. In the lunar hangar, Sam Crew's wing erupted. The cheer bounced off the rock ceiling and came back loud enough to make ears ring, and nobody tried to quiet it. Pete Holt, sitting at his grid monitoring station with 4 empty coffee cups in a row beside him, and the serene expression of a man whose mathematics had been correct, heard the cheer come through the general channel, and allowed himself one long, slow exhale. In the carrier's main corridor, Owen Bray leaned against the bulkhead with his arms crossed, looking at the middle distance. Will Carr stood beside him, saying nothing, because nothing needed to be said out loud by either of them. In the briefing room, Drake watched the signature go onto the document and felt the weight of 40 years change its shape. Not lift. Change. Earth was a different thing than it had been 24 hours ago, and understanding exactly what that meant was going to take time. The Council's political structure was going to fracture in the months ahead as the tribunal provision forced an accounting that rippled through every member species. Some of the client states were going to need support. Real support, practical and sustained. Earth was not finished. In many ways, it was just beginning. One detail remained. Zareth had submitted a quiet request through Veth. He wanted to keep the carrier. He had no particular interest in returning to Council space now that certain records were public knowledge across the full network, and he noted that if Earth had use for someone with complete working knowledge of Council tactical systems and fleet operations, he was available to discuss the arrangement. Drake had told Nora he would consider it. He thought about it for roughly 4 seconds. "Tell him yes," Drake said. "Already sent," Nora replied. Outside, layered through the full inner system like a patient and invisible architecture, Shield Wall was still running. It would keep running, not because another fleet was expected, because the galaxy had just learned what Earth was capable of when it was given 40 years and a reason, and some lessons were worth keeping visible. The universe was large. Much of it had not yet received the broadcast. Earth would be ready when it did.